Pastor Ben, this last Sunday you preached from Matthew chapter 10, and you were helping us see this calling that is placed upon the apostles as they're being sent out to do ministry. And you used as an example to help us understand Christian leadership, how we're called, we are trained, we are sent. And my question to you is today, aren't we all called into ministry? I mean, for the person who's in the pew, that's not going to go into vocational ministry, where that's their employment, that's their job. How should they hear us preach texts like that? Are they called to evangelize, to minister, to be used of the Lord as an ambassador? What would you say to that?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially since there are some who would look, for instance, the Great Commission we'll look at in a minute, and would teach that that was written for the apostles, not for everyone. And therefore they would say that it's not your job as just a member of a church and not a pastor to go and evangelize. Well, we would disagree with that. So when we preach passages like Matthew 10, 5-15 that we looked at last week, and we talk about being called, trained, and sent, we do need to discuss that. We need to differentiate, and we're talking there about pastors, perhaps, or missionaries, maybe full-time evangelists. But yeah, I appreciate that question. We need to clarify that. What we don't want to give the impression of is that if I'm not called to be a pastor, well, great, then I'm off the hook. I don't need to share Christ. I don't need to make disciples. But that's not the case at all. There is a special and unique calling that God places on the life of a man who will become a pastor, for instance. Right. And we talked about that in the sermon Sunday. But yes, there's a sense in which all Christians are commanded, maybe we can just use that word so as not to be confusing. While some are called unto vocational ministry, all are commanded to represent Christ in the world,
right,
to share the gospel, to be involved in making disciples. And that may look different in every person's life and every setting, but there's still an obligation to pursue that. And we would look at two passages that you already know that we can look at again would be the Great Commission in Matthew 28, 19 and 20 we'll look at, and also Acts 1:8, which strangely doesn't have a name like the Great Commission, but perhaps it should. It's the great affirmation or confirmation or something. Yeah. It's two wonderful promises of Jesus to his apostles there, but I think it applies to us as well. But we'll start in Matthew 28. In fact, we'll just back up here to verse 16. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. And I see at least two reasons here why this cannot be restricted only to the apostles. The first would be Jesus says, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. The apostles themselves had access to very few nations. Travel was hard at that time, and they only got to a few nations, frankly.
Right.
But number two, Jesus gives this incredible promise to all of us as we go out in his name. And he says, I will be with you always to the end of the age.
That's good.
Well, that obviously outlives the apostles. That would apply to the entirety of the church age, which would apply, I think, to all Christians. I do not think that that would apply just to pastors, but rather to all in the church age. And we could skip to Acts chapter 1. Here's Jesus' last words in the flesh to his disciples. They've just asked. They, like us, are curious about the end times. Is it now that you will restore the kingdom to Israel? And he pushes that off and says, no, it's not for you to know times fixed by the Father's authority. But he redirects them. Mm-hmm. What does he say? He says, but But you will receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the end of the earth. And again, this phrase, to the end of the earth, there's no way for the apostles themselves to fulfill that. Yeah. I believe that in both cases, Jesus is speaking about the entirety of the church age. And I cannot come up with a reason to contain this only to those set apart for vocational ministry. Yeah. Now, if we had more time than this format would allow, we could look at, honestly, passages in every New Testament letter that would lean in the direction of a responsibility being given to all Christians to go forward and to share Christ, to tell others how they can be saved, and to seek to help Christians along in their spiritual growth. So yes, in that sense, is there a unique call that goes out to some who are set aside for vocational ministry as pastors or perhaps missionaries or evangelists? Yes, they are called and trained and sent in a unique way. And yet, all Christians are commanded in their own ways to be involved in serving Christ by sharing the truth about him with others, with unbelievers, and encouraging other followers of Christ in their faith as well. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful.